Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second Chicago Studies conversation. This is a series in which we attempt to learn from scholar practitioners who are active in a range of issues around the city. This event, if you aren't aware, follows up on a podcast conversation that we had with one of our Chicago Studies BA authors, Valeria Stutz. Her BA and the podcast about it are both available on our website. Those dealt specifically with questions of housing and displacement and community development in the Woodlawn neighborhood. And that podcast was hosted by our Chicago Studies preceptor, Shannon Morrissey. Shannon will be taking us through today's conversation, and so I'm going to hand things over to Shannon to introduce our panelists today.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks everyone for joining us for today's conversation. The podcast recording with Valeria, one of the kind of takeaways from her research, which was a discourse analysis around the Obama Presidential Center and the Southside CBA Coalition, had to do with the question of scale. And so, she noticed in the analysis that the Obama Library was talking about scale in terms of like the engine for an entire South Side, for a whole kind of region of the city, which had Valeria and I thinking about what would development look like if there's sort of a smaller scale in mind, something where it's intended to benefit the particular residents of a neighborhood or an area, and where residents are actually kind of involved in defining the goals of that development or that project. So we're really excited today to be joined by Angela Hurlock of Claretian Associates and Felicia Dawson of POAH. Both have a wealth of experience and expertise in affordable housing and community-driven development. And I know they're also friends, so I think it's going to be a great conversation today. Our format is to give each presenter about 5 or 10 minutes to introduce themselves and the organization that they're representing. I have a few questions prepared to kick off the discussion, but we will ask attendees to go ahead and drop questions in the chat. We will save time for those at the end. But yeah, without further ado, I'll hand it off to Angela to introduce herself and share a little bit about Claretian Associates.
Hi, everybody. Can you guys hear me? Okay, great. All right. So Angela Hurlock, my name is Angela Hurlock. I'm the executive director for Claretian Associates. I have been here at Claretian for about 17 years. Prior to being here, I was the I'm the executive director. Prior to being here, I was the vice president of real estate development for Bethel New Life, which is a CDC on the west side, and where I was fortunate enough to meet the elaborate Felicia Dawson and work with her for the first time. And then prior to that, I was practicing architecture privately. I am an architect by training and spent many years in private practice before coming into community development. So Claretian Associates is a community development corporation on the far southeast side of Chicago. We focus on the neighborhoods that border Indiana. So as far south and east as you can go before you hit Indiana. And so our offices are about 3,200 east, that is not the lake, and 9,200 south. And our history really is steeped in the history of steel mills. We had a steel mill that was actively running in our neighborhood, and for many years, the steel that built downtown was actually crafted in our neighborhood. And so many families were tied to that industry. And as that industry started to fail in the late 1970s, and the steel mill decided to close in the 80s, a lot of families actually moved away. And so our neighborhood began to see things like disinvestment and those types of things. The Claretian missionaries, who were an order of Catholic priests, who came to South Chicago in the 1920s, were very interested in making sure that their parishioners had quality housing to live in. And so that's how we began. We began as a program of the local parish. And in 1991, we were incorporated into our own CDC and have been doing work ever since. We've done about 250 units of housing within a 5-by-7 block area. So our targeted housing is South Chicago. And so that's, like I said, 5 blocks one way, 7 blocks another way. We've done about 250 units of housing. 40 of those are single family homes in 2-class, and the rest are apartments spread over about 5 different developments. About 75% of that housing is senior based. Senior for us is 55 years and older, although one of our buildings is also 62-year resident and older. So our residents go all the way from our youngest resident is birth, and currently our oldest resident is 103, and she lives in one of our independent senior buildings. So with support from her daughters, her children and her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren and her great-great-grandchildren, she is able to stay independent. And so we believe in working on quality of life issues. And so I'll talk a little bit more, but that's kind of a little bit about who we are and what we do. Probably about 90% of our staff are from the community as well. They live or can drive about 5 minutes before getting to our building. And so in that 17 years, one other thing to take into note is when I came to Claretian Associates, we were one organization, about 3 full-time, 5 part-time people, including the part-time janitor and receptionist. And now we are 4 different legal entities and about 80 folks. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And I will turn it over to Felicia to introduce herself.
Thank you, Angela. It's such a pleasure. Right after you, Angela, Felicia Dawson, Vice President of Strategic Partnerships for Preservation of Affordable Housing. Angela and I do go a ways back. We have a couple of ties. We joined the wonderful 100-year-old same sorority, so that makes her special. So my career started a little different, and I'm going to do this 1-minute version and go right into POAH. So I started by way of Bradley University as a neurosurgeon major, who said, oh, this chemistry 495 class sucks. So this is probably not what I should be doing. So I moved to Kansas City with my husband and my new baby. I started school to finish my degrees at University of Missouri, Kansas City. I got an internship at an organization called Community Development Corporation of Kansas City. And I'm mentioning them because they were the site of where, I don't know, those of you that don't are too young to know this, but look it up. There's a movie called The Day After, and it's about a nuclear, the remnants of what happens after a nuclear war. That site where we worked was the site of them filming what happens after a nuclear bomb would hit a neighborhood. So the governor wanted to put a lifetime prison in the middle of a neighborhood like Woodlawn, which was this neighborhood on the south side of Kansas City, in the middle of the neighborhood, and the residents got together and fought. And what came out of that was two square blocks of commercial and some tax credit units, some housing, some other stuff. So that's where I got my teeth, because I started as a community organizer there and did all of, so I was doing, in nonprofit, you do too many jobs at one time. So I was a community organizer and I was the real estate grunt work person. So titles, title searches, all type of transactions I was doing the grunt work for, but I was also organizing the community. I came back to Chicago, and that's when Angela and I'd been at Bethel a little while. Angela joined us at Bethel New Life, and that's where I really cut my teeth and kind of putting together the nuts and bolts, the hardware of community development, which is brick and mortar, and then the software, which is the equitable development stuff around people being a part of the process and kind of taking away the disconnect and creating a synergy between them. So I did all of that, a program officer, and then ended up at the big project that was Ida B. Wells Reformation with the community builders, and then came to POAH. POAH got a grant from HUD in 2011, the first of its kind, called Choice. Here in Chicago, it was our first entree into neighborhood revitalization. POAH is a Boston-based development company. We have about 12,000 units around the country, but when I started, we're almost 20 years old. Actually, we'll be 20 years old next year. But when I started, we only had 7,800 units. And when I started at POAH, April will be 10 years. So we've done a lot of stuff in 10 years, but our work in Woodlawn was our first entree into that neighborhood work. We're usually what we call acquisition rehab deals, where we acquire property, rehab it, and rehab it with people in the unit. So, so this was our first entree into that work, and we really tried to figure out and learn the hard way what it takes to do this work from that kind of comprehensive perspective. So here we are, we're 10 years in. We've done a lot of stuff, and what I'd like to say is we did that listening to the resident. And it was a lesson learned. I mean, we had to figure out, you know, the hard nuts and bolts of the reality of what development is. It pretty much is a black and white type of industry, but what we've learned is how to figure out how to connect people to that work and be engaged and involved in the process from the beginning. And we really cut our teeth on that here. We started out with 504 project-based Section 8 units that the residents asked us to come and redevelop, I must say. At the request of the residents, we came in and redeveloped with that choice grant with a lot of effort on the development side, a lot of push, but we've subsequently almost completed all of those units plus an additional 400 because the total was 995. We've done a lot of commercial work. We did the first 40-unit market rental building in Woodlawn in 40 years. I'm sorry, 24 unit in 40 years. Here in Woodlawn, we helped to bring the grocery store to the community. So Jules, that was a site of the old former Grove Park. That's right. Clap it up and snap it up, Chris. That was a hard fight. I will just say that part of our work we included as a community benefit developing the Woodlawn Resource Center, which does a lot of the traditional quality of life things that Angela mentioned. And one of the things that we did do, that we played the hardball and really were hard asses on Jules to really try to hire people from the community. So our efforts, at the 530 people they were hired, we got 76% of those people from the neighborhood. So that was about 376 people that we got hired, but that was a yeoman's task. And we had been training people to get into those jobs 3 years prior, anticipating that type of grocery hospitality retail coming in. So we don't try to be everything to everybody because we can't. I think what we've almost mastered, not quite, but we're very good at is figuring out who can we partner with and then leverage what we bring to the table and what they can do to bring to the table. So our work with residents kind of started about 7 years ago, really we realized that the unit could be an asset for not only us, but for the residents. And we really want them to move, if they so choose, from stability to security to economic mobility. How do you move out? I mean, it's okay if you save your money, if you want to decide you want to buy that house or live on 12th and Michigan at Sky 55, whatever the choice is you have, the goal is to expose and connect families to that sense of, I can do something different because I want to. And really pushing in terms of the economic stability and mobility. That's the key to transitions in community and families, is being able to help people tap their own, what I call financial markets within their households. So I'm trying to do the quick and dirty version so that we can get to questions. So I will say that the next biggest thing outside of all of the development that we've done, the commercial stuff that we have going, the biggest thing is we just received a grant for $2.5 million that we're calling Designing Trauma Resilient Communities. And essentially what it is building on what I just talked about. If we can design and create a space and environment that really makes it conducive to people really feeling like they matter, and then operationalize that in the way we build the building, in the way we do our management, in the way we operate properties, we know we can actually get to that economic mobility and stability, and people feel different. It's all about, my new word for 2020 and 2021 is disruption. We want to disrupt the way we do things. And this is a disruption for us, even though we've been trying it anecdotally at different sites. I know we're trying a little bit of it in our DC property. We're trying a little bit of it in our Boston properties because we've got about 6 of these bigger neighborhood revitalization efforts that we now have underway starting back 10 years ago from the first one in Chicago. So we've been trying it anecdotally, but this allows us to deep dive at sites with everybody connected to us in our operations, outside partners. It's going to totally flip his head around how we do development. And I will just tell you this last story, and then I'm going to stop talking, Sarah and Chris. This is a true story. I often get in trouble for telling true stories. But so when we first started this effort around this grant, I was like, okay, damn, it's another grant. We're going to jump on it and some new buzzwords and something else we're going to do. But I will tell you, I was sold on our own, because we had to do an interview. And we had to do an interview where we had to literally illustrate what it is that we intended to do with this resiliency grant. And I think after 27 years of doing this work, I think this is the thing that can change and get to real disruption, because it's gonna make people uncomfortable. It's gonna make systems have to think about itself and actually do something different. We can even begin to have real and not phony conversations about race. I mean, it's all of that is gonna be packed in this process. And it sounds like a lot, but I think we figured out how to bite the elephant piece at a time, but still keep it connected so that that disruption comes to an actionable item and some real change. So we're excited about that. That's another heavy lift for us. I would say the final thing is in terms of the spirit of economic mobility, we do operate with the first nonprofit developer to operate and manage the Family Self-Sufficiency Program. It allows people to save money, it takes away the disincentive of getting a better job when you're in subsidized housing. So it allows people to save money and get towards that goal of home ownership, paying off bills, getting out of debt, all of those things. So we operate that, and we have that at 33 sites now in our portfolio, and we started that a few years ago. So I'm gonna stop there. It's a whole lot of other stuff. I'm gonna stop there and give it back to Sarah, I think, or Chris, or Shannon, sorry.
No, that's okay. This great introductions, and you've both raised some things I'm already excited to follow up on. So when people hear the phrase affordable housing, often we think first of sort of the brick and mortar, the physical buildings. But as you both mentioned, it's more about quality of life issues, and there's the software, I think was Felicia's word, which I love. So in the 10 plus years that you've both been working in this area, do you mind sharing some of the stories or examples of kind of missteps or mistakes that you kind of learned from and then tried to course correct?
Yeah, that's a good question when you start talking about mistakes, right? So I think I have about 3 slides that I want to share at some point in time today, just so you can get a grasp. And the first one I'm going to share, if you guys can see this is an example of the housing that we do. And so in the middle, there is the parish of the priest that started us. And then around the edges are different kind of housing. To the left, we have Via Guadalupe, which is our senior housing, 55 and older, like I mentioned. This is actually where both the 55-year-old and the 103-year-old live. We have new single-family homes that we've done in the left-hand corner. We have rehab that we've done. This is what we call our corporate offices. We took those 3 flats and turned it into our offices. We do open space as well, because we understand that, and this is something that we've learned by default. You cannot do multifamily housing and not make a space for children to play, because that's what you want children to do. You want them to play, you want them to be active, you want them to enjoy their lives as children. But if you don't have open space for them to play in and you don't build that into your development, you will feel it later on as you're trying to maintain those developments. So that's one of the parks that we built. At the bottom, we are the community partner on a assisted living building, which is that is the Victory Center of South Chicago. And then above that are a couple of our rehab projects, an 8-unit building and a 7-unit building that we rehabbed. One of them was through the Neighborhood Stabilization Program. So that is during the 2007 foreclosure crisis. A lot of money was being put into helping people maintain their homes and home ownership, but there were quite a number of people who were just struggling in rental. And so there were buildings that were going by the wayside, usually small buildings, 7, 8 units, up to 10 units, that were just beginning to flatten out and be deserted and boarded up. And those kinds of things cause all types of safety issues when you just have buildings that are just vacant and kids have to walk by them. And so those are some of the examples of some of the buildings that we were able to secure and renovate. And then at the top, it's Casa Kirk, our rental building we built it from the ground up in 2005, 29 units of affordable rental housing. All of our rental housing is slated towards families that are at 50% AMI. And so If you're not sure what that means, so currently the city's AMI is about area median income is what it stands for. And the area median income for the city is about $75,000. However, only 1 out of 4 families in the city makes that. And so if that is kind of the target, what 100% is, we focus on 50%, which are families of 4 that make about $37,000 and below. And so that's what our target is. The next slide I want to show, which speaks to, kind of lessons that we've learned, is that when we do development, we are developing. So when I came to Claretian Associates, I thought, you give people 4 walls, it should fix everything. That's primarily because I worked with the organizing department, but I wasn't in the organizing department at Bethel, right? And so I was like, my job is to give them 4 walls. Everything else works itself out. Not the case. You have to look at families and how that 4 walls extends in building families, building people up to their next best level. And so over the years, by making that mistake of it's not just the 4 walls, but how do we work within the families, we've learned to program around our buildings. And so the way the Claretian Associates approaches things is one with our housing at the center, but how do we build up the families within that housing? And so there's the Claretian level, there's the neighborhood level, and then there's the larger community level. And so our projects, all of our development, focus on how we can bring the other things. Yes, we get people into safe 4 walls. What are the other things that they need so that they can get to their next best level? And we have families where they are coming from, shelters into living in an apartment for the first time with their kids. And we have families where the kids and the parents are in college. So we have the gamut. We have male-run households, female-run households, grandparents, and non-biological connection families as well. And so how do we make for opportunities for them around employment? How do we make opportunities for them to be socially integrated into the neighborhood and into the development? How do we look at education and advocacy so they can understand their power? Because everyone has power, it's how they learn to use it. And then how do we promote healthy behaviors? And so all of our programming fits into one of these 4 categories. And so you can see here where we have programs that work around employment and social integration, like safe passages, and it was called Ceasefire, it's now called Community Partnering for Peace, which is a street outreach program. We do a lot of collective impact work. We're just now beginning to move into trying to look at doing a social enterprise so we can hire folks that are not as easily hireable. Something that Felicia said that I thought was very crucial. When you think about bringing an entity in that you want to hire folks from the community, you have to prepare the folks to be hired, right? And so when she said we started 3 years before that, preparing these people for the jobs that were going to come, that is foresight, because you just can't say, here's a job, go get it. That doesn't happen in a lot of cases. You have to prepare people for those jobs that you're also bringing. With financial literacy, with counseling, counseling around not only finances, but we do a lot of work around being trauma informed and about how people have been neglected or challenged for a very long time, and then how do you come out of that? When you have that listless youth in the classroom, some people can think they're detached and not interested and lack motivation, but they've actually been traumatized. They've had to make it through school. One of our largest programs up until this year was our Safe Passages program, which was hiring people in the community to basically just be the eyes and ears of the community to allow our students to get to school safely. Because so many kids were being involved in shootings and gang activity and those types of things. Kids make it safely to school where they eat, because some of them aren't eating at home, and then they want to make it safely back home. But that's traumatic. That's not normal. Although, because when you sit in something for a long time, you begin to normalize it, right? And you begin to cope with it. So those are all things that we noticed that we had to start definitely planning for and programming around if we wanted to help our families to be healthy in the social determinants of health methodology. So the last slide I want to show you, and just as I brought it back up, I came right on Nia Abdullah. So excited to see her, which worked with Nia a long time ago at Bowen, and so glad to see her at MatchCore now. Glad to see you, dear. I'll bring up the last slide, which we'll talk a little bit more about, but I just want you to see what's very, very critical for us right now as a organization is that we not live in a moment of the heydays are behind us. We are trying to create a community that is culturally vibrant, is cohesive, is growing, and it's a community of choice. It's a community where people aren't resigned to live, but they choose to live. And so we have this belief that communities of choice have 6 key elements. They have their community and resident-led. They have affordable housing, affordable to a variety of different levels of economic genre. They have social and cultural spaces that people can enjoy. They have a thriving business corridor. And there's economic opportunity and places for people to get jobs and continue to build wealth. And so I wanted to share this with you because this is one of the impetus to how we began to partner with POAH to buy the YMCA, the old YMCA, which we refer to now as the Salud Center, which stands for health in Spanish. And so, you know, we've been looking at partnering with POAH. We're looking at 101 units of senior housing, but also 40,000 square feet of community space. And so we're going to be moving, and it's under development, under construction right now. We're going to be moving our offices into that space, plus co-locating other nonprofits into that space to begin to work on health issues so that we can have a culturally vibrant and socially healthy and community of choice. And so I'll stop right there. So some of the things we've learned that you can't just build the walls, got to build the families, got to build the community, got to build the neighborhood. That's my answer, and I'm sticking to it. Felicia?
That was a good answer, Angela. I would say that we learn the same thing. I think that and I think the important lesson for us was that we learned it a little bit based upon a little bit of hard knocks. I mean, really listening to community and allowing them to tell us what they like to see, and then us going back, because it does impact quite a bit of what we do. I mean, the reality is if you're going to develop property and really, really take people's words and hear them and then respond to them, it's going to cost a little bit more money because it's going to take a little bit more time, and we're going to have to invest in some renderings from our architects, everybody is going to have to step up, and we're going to have a couple of more meetings, just not regular community meetings. I think that what we learned is to really get engaged and get people's input and then listen and then do it. I think what I've always pushed and what I think POAH learned well is there's a difference between me doing outreach to you, me engaging you, and then getting your input and then your involvement. All of those things are different. They overlap in many ways, but they're very different. And you can show up in any one of them, but if you want long-term sustainability of what you're doing, and then really it to be the thing that's impactful in the neighborhood, you really want people to be engaged at the level that they're involved. They own it. So when we first built our buildings, the residents inside of them owned them. I think the residents, when we did the senior building, for example, we started from the beginning of the development process, very painful, but it was fun, and we took the time to inform, educate, and walk through. We had to change design a bit. The community pushed back on our first design of our buildings and said they didn't like it. So we went back and then looked at some different building materials and came back and said, what about this? So we made the modifications along the way because we heard what people were saying. But that lesson came hard. I mean, it took us some time to learn that, and this community, as so many are, will smack you in the head if you don't listen and you continue to move forward and don't really hear them. You can have a meeting and be in their face, but they will hold you accountable if you do, in fact, do not respond. So I think that was a lesson learned. I think the other lesson learned early on for us was we really try to do, because it makes sense, what we call a bill first. Really trying to look at how you take your time, because this issue of gentrification has embedded in it displacement, obviously. And people automatically, when we were doing the 504, that was an entire 2 blocks, the middle of Woodlawn. So the people that lived there were like, could have been, they're getting rid of us. But we made an early commitment early on to bring them back one for one. And we had that conversation with them because they brought us to the table. But the second thing was the surrounding neighbors were like, absolutely not. And this is what I call not NIMBYism. I call it not on back porch, because it's a very different concept. We all live in this neighborhood together. We all Black folks. But for some reason, you don't want me living in a subsidized unit to be in your neighborhood that I've been in for the last 30 years with you. So really, so the issue of race that I mentioned earlier showed its ugly head in terms of class. So we got caught in that firestorm. So for us, it was trying to figure out how do you balance that? And one of the things that we thought made sense was, let's do a bill first. Let's take it down slowly, bring people out, know where people are, and then tear down the next. But the chaos that ensued, the residents that lived in the property in Grove Park and in the surrounding neighborhood said, you need to tear that sucker down. So we actually listened to that. We were informed by that, and then we modified our plan, so we took the rest of it out. But we had to be careful to stay connected and engage with the residents throughout. So we connected them to services, we connected them to resources, and we try to, as interesting as it was, we connected them to the surrounding community that they had already been around. So I will tell you, another lesson we learned was, well, first off, it's an old organizing lesson I learned from working at Bethel, which is set you up. So we got a lot of pushback from the community about this 504 project-based Section 8. Believe it or not, it was in its own little vacuum island in the middle of the neighborhood. People drove around it. People hated to go through the middle of the neighborhood because Cottage Grove is a major thoroughfare from the west side from south side to north side. People always say it's a gateway to the north side. I say it's a gateway to the south side. So it's such a huge space, but people would be afraid. If you didn't live in Woodlawn, you just didn't understand, but you know what you heard, because this development surrounded that major intersection with the green line there. So what we recognized was there was a disconnect in conversation. When you say community, you got to know what community means. Community is just not the people that live in the property that you're developing and managing. Community is everybody in that neighborhood, from the guy that owned the pharmacy for 40 years, the young lady that has the veterinary shop, to Mr. Knox, who was on the corner and sold ice cream that probably he shouldn't be selling anymore, but he does anyway now. Those are the things and the people that you have to know and get to know and be a part of. And we learned that lesson the hard way. So the neighborhood galvanized against us. And if you know anything about Woodlawn, Woodlawn was in 2 factions. You had the east side and the west side. They didn't necessarily talk to one another, but they knew each other existed. And I'll give you a little bit of history. Because of the fight with the University of Chicago, there was this proverbial wall. So everybody on the east side of Cottage Grove very much wanted the university to come in, bring in the new housing, bring in those professors, bring in the students and let them all move into Woodlawn. They wanted it. And everybody on the west side was like, hell no, we won't go. You're trying to displace us and kick us out. So there was that tension, along with the tension with the university, the 9,000-pound gorilla in the neighborhood. I didn't love university. So there was this tension with them, and the residents started to galvanize because they thought we were kind of demand for the university. So they actually created no POAH signs. I mean, they actually went to a store, a Kinko's, and printed out and laminated no POAH signs that they put in their window. There became a movement against us and this redevelopment. So that put us in a very unique spot. How do you bring conversations together and that are totally different? Now, we are the same, but we're very different. So how do you bring those conversations together with us in the middle? So after being set up a couple of times, I think, and I tell this story because it's important, because it gets to this other issue about race that I mentioned. When the local elected official called a big meeting, there was about 100 people there at the Park District talking about this development. And everybody came to this meeting. The Grove Park residents from the community. The community has had people move in when they thought we were going to get the Olympics, a lot of speculation that never went anywhere. So you got people that own their homes, that invested, and they're not really seeing that real return because, you know, Woodlawn is still plagued with some real crime issues, which is another thing that we are plagued with in our neighborhoods. So I think for me, the turning point in the conversation was when you had people standing up and calling the people that lived in the property all kinds of names, and they're sitting right there. And just sharing, spewing out their hatred and disdain for those people. Now, we all look alike. Just keep that in mind. And for me, the key was the residents from Grove Park were really upset, started standing up, crying, trying to validate and legitimize why they should be in the neighborhood. Because my son went to college, or my daughter went to St. Ignatius, or all of these things. And you would think that since we are Black, we have a similar experience, we wouldn't feel this and have to go through this, but we did. So for me, the approach changed because no longer as a community organizer, we really were about consensus building. How do you build consensus and get along? And that's a good strategy to take. However, you have to organically create consensus in an inorganic way. And what I would tell you is the train was gonna move because the people that lived in the property had the absolute right to live here if they so choose, and nobody should tell them different. And what we have to create is new norms in our neighborhood together. So we're not gonna stigmatize each other. So our approach changed, and I appreciate POAH going along with me. I can say that because the managing director of our real estate department is on our line with us, Mr. Brown, so he can attest to this. POAH really allowed us to shift here in Chicago and really this train is gonna move. You either get on board and we're gonna give you ways to be a part of it or not. And I think some of the things, and I'm gonna show my couple of little slides. I don't have beautiful buildings, well I actually do, but I'm not gonna go through that whole slide process of the beautiful buildings, but the formula for us is really kind of simple. I say this in my team, and I'm just gonna pull out the formula and just use that one. Oh God, where is it? I just lost it. But the formula for us is really simple. It's transparency. You gotta be transparent. You must be transparent. And my line is always, we're gonna tell you what we're gonna do. You may not like it, but it's always gonna be the truth, and we're willing to sit down at the table and talk to you about it and with you to figure it out. So that's the first thing. The second thing is inclusion. That conversation about, do I want your input? See, your input means you're gonna tell me if you like something and then I'm gonna go. But your input, but your involvement and you be included is we're gonna walk together lockstep, hand in hand. Some things, this is part of the truth, some things are just what they are. And brick and mortar has some black and white. Costs are real. I'm really clear and concise and really transparent about costs. It cost us $2.50 to build this building. And we can't pack it with $9 worth of things that we just know we can't build. So let's figure out how we get to $2.50. So being transparent, and I think the final thing is consistency. When we started work, I think one of our missteps was because we were trying to figure it out. Which direction do we go? I can't find this. I just told you, so there's no need of me showing you the slide now. But so and I will show it before I stop talking. But the thing for us is we were trying to figure it out. What is it that makes sense in terms of the development? Because this was a massive undertaking for an organization that usually does what we call acquisition rehab deals, as I mentioned earlier. So transitioning to this neighborhood effort that had all of these other stakeholders, because keep in mind, the city was very much a partner with us in our choice grant, and you have all these other players that we have to manage in our day-to-day work as developers. But then you've got all these other politics. We probably had the biggest players in the city of politics and political maneuverers in this neighborhood, working towards, not maybe against, sometime with, I mean, it just depended, but they were all in one neighborhood. So we had to manage all of that. So some missteps for us was, what do we figure out? So we weren't consistent, but we got it. So consistency in the message. It is what it is. We took the choice budget of $30 million, $30.5 million, and we broke it out and we gave it out to the world. We just told people, here is what we are spending, here's what we got, Here's how much it costs to do this. Here's where you can help us figure out how we spend. Here's where you can't, because it just is. So I think for us, that was a lesson learned. And I think we've been on that journey ever since. And finally, I will say, and I will pull this up since I can't pull up, it was a really cute slide. I think I just closed it out on myself. But what we did do was, I think that led us to what we're doing right now with the resiliency, because all of that work with community, and let me tell you, I don't want to downplay the work of development, the nuts and bolts of it is not easy. It's not rocket science, but there is a science to it. And we've got some really good project managers and VPs that do this on a daily basis, who think about and now inform their work around these things, around community, around being thoughtful about what type of building do we build. But I think the thing that stood out for us is, as we do this work of affordable housing, we could talk about all the things that we're trying to do and what we want to see happen, but a lot of the work is informed by policy. And if the policies are not structured in a way to make it easy for us to do this, then we are just shooting ourselves in the foot and be on a vicious cycle. So I think with the Resiliency Project, we can actually tackle some of the work that we have to do in policy. So tell me, do you see my screen?
Yes, yeah, we do.
Okay. I'm talking real fast because I don't like to talk too much, believe it or not, but I did want us to get to questions, and as soon as I can move my thing around to get to my slideshow, I'll show you. So, and I can't talk and do this at the same time clearly. So one of the things that we learned was that there are some disincentives. I talked about it earlier with, nope, that's not it either. Let's just stop. I'll send it to you after this is over, because obviously I can't do it and talk at the same time. But there are some things we learned about policy. Don't laugh at me, Chris. Don't beat me, Roger. But there are some things we learned about policy. And a good example is, if in fact you're in a subsidized unit, as your income goes up, your rent goes up. Well, you understand, if I'm only making let me just say $24,000 a year, the cost of living is 48, and the area median income is what Angela just said, it's a lot of gap there. But my rent goes up, so I'm disincentivized to want to get a job and do something different, because I'm still going to be in the hole when my rent goes up. So how do we figure out a way to begin a policy discussion about taking away the distance? FSS allows us to do that, so that you can use, when your rent goes up, when you get that better job, you can use that difference in the rent, put in savings, and that money you get back, you can pay down some debt, you can buy a house, you can go back to school, send your children to school, some things that you can actually do. That's the policy discussion. I think what we've been tried to be, at least as we think in our heads, I'm sure we have, on the cutting edge of, is how do we take and flip and disrupt the policy discussions, which is how we were able to be the FSS operator of this program. That was public housing authorities usually manage this program, but here we are, a nonprofit development company managing this program. Because we're saying that's not an incentive for me to want to grow. That's only going to keep me in my own space and keep me always trying to be the hamster wheel, going around trying to make it, never going to make it. So those type of policy discussions, the Resiliency Project allows us to have and then demonstrate how we can disrupt the way we do that work. I think the other thing about the resiliency and lesson we learned is really getting into design. Sometimes when you walk into a management office, it looks like you are going to the clinic and you're about to get a shot with a 9-foot needle. It's just painful. It's not conducive to me sharing. And yeah, I'm just paying my rent, but there might be some other things and more importantly, when you come to our property, we want you to do something else. We want you to do some other things. So how do we change the way we design spaces? Angela touched on it in terms of having space for children. Thinking beyond that, I mean, we're working on a project now that we're looking at how do we design a space. We don't really want to put up fencing, but how are we creative about defensible spaces in architectural design? So it's pretty, as I always say, architects hate when I say that because I don't, this just means so much, but so it's pretty, but it functionally supports what the residents want, which is security in a real way, but you don't feel like you're behind gates. So we're thinking through that in some of our developments, along with matching it with how we operate the property. We're not going to paste a red door on your, you didn't pay rent. How do we modify our operations? I mean, those things go together in creating a space that helps people deal with the trauma that we know people, all of us feel. And I think that's the final lesson learned. We have a couple of sites, and I know other partners like us are experiencing this. Trauma is deeply embedded in everything we do. All of us have had some trauma in our lives, but I tell you, there's a fundamental difference to someone who has lived in the neighborhood where the streets have never been clean. It's vacant lots, it's abandoned buildings every day. You hear the sirens, somebody shot, and you're ducking when you go into the store, if there's a store, and the local grocery store sells you meat, $15 a pound, the bread is $7. That is trauma. That is ever hitting and never stopping, perpetuating itself. That deeply impacts your psyche. On top of trauma, I know my cousin's been shot. You don't know how many meetings I've been in. I've either seen a fight, somebody stabbed, I've seen somebody shot, I've seen somebody killed. Those things, if you're in a neighborhood, in a lot of neighborhoods, you're used to it. So we want to disrupt being sensitive. We want to disrupt not being shocked by it. It's not normal. We want to make it not normal again. We want people to feel like this is not how you supposed to live, should live, and you can be a part of how it changes. So the Resiliency Project allows us to kind of think through that, believe it or not, at our little sites, in our own little ways, site by site, resident by resident. I swear to God, I had some really nice slides, but crazy. But I think those are the lessons learned in this work. And I think the other lesson I'll say, the fourth thing is we're not really commercial developers. We don't really do commercial retail. But since we have some retail bays here, we've been, and again, I'm gonna have to give it to POAH because it is not easy. Commercial retail is different than residential. And I will just tell you, real estate is different than residential. I'll tell you, there's a lot more at stake. But taking the time to identify local businesses and really working with them to get them to a place where they can actually sustain themselves in their own neighborhood. That's a hard task, and we are learning that lesson in real time, but we've been committed to it. So we heard what residents said about what they wanted. We didn't do the typical stores. We really tried to think outside the circle and get the things that people need. We no longer will we do the same things that you always see in our neighborhoods. We really wanted to be the resource amenities that residents ask for. And what we've tried to do is be in the middle of that class conversation, but always being in it to make it be a real conversation so that we can work through to a new place that disrupts the way we think and the constructs, our own constructs we have in our mind about our neighbors and people. I promise, while Angela's probably talking, I'm gonna pop up a slide. I'm now determined.
We will we'll attach an image of that slide, if you don't mind, Felicia, to the recording. That'll be perfect. But I'm so glad both of you shared these stories and these lessons, because I think it's clear that for both organizations, it's not a one-size-fits-all model. And even in the slide that Angela shared, we are still steel here, kind of the reference to the steel mills. I think, the history of the land and the people matter so much. And, that story about East and West Woodlawn, I think points to that often you are needing to reconcile very contradictory perspectives, having to be sort of this consensus builder. So it's been so great. Thank you both. I want to go to a question that we saw in the chat. This is starting to think about, advice for students who might be interested in studying affordable housing, community-driven development, and related topics. A question from Sarah: where are the best places for students interested in affordable housing to learn about the policies that impact, this work? What advice do you have?
Now, I would say if you're just talking about literally reading articles and things like that and kind of trying to track the history, there's some places that I would immediately go to. There's the Chicago Rehab Network, which is an organization that is a network of affordable developers. If you go to their website, they have wonderful articles and they follow policy all around affordable housing. On a statewide level, there's Housing Action Illinois. That's also another good organization. That's a membership organization that follows, again, housing and those types of things. But I mean, there's you literally could just type into your browser affordable housing. You could type in housing discrimination. You can type, like, you would learn so much if you just delve into how housing has been used as a great discriminator between redlining and contract buying and all kinds of things. Chicago has a very rich history around its housing, and also how housing has been used to malign and kind of force certain groups of people and maintain certain demographics. So those are some initial things I would say. What about you, Felicia?
I would add that I think a good read is The Cost of Segregation that MPC did. I think it's a really good read in terms of the conversation about segregation and this notion of how do we, again, disrupt what affordable housing looks like and where should it be. I mean, it really unpacks NIMBYism and then Not on My Back Porch. So it does that. I think another good place to go is the Policy Link website. So Policy Link, I remember when it first started years ago with Angela Glover, but I think what they do is really kind of walk you through or touch on how equitable development really makes sense. And when we say equitable development, it's really how do you put all the quality forms together to try and make a community grow, or help a community grow in a real way. And there's equity in a lot of different things. And it's similar to asset-based design and development. I mean, we always look at deficits in the neighborhood. What do we have to fix? Wrong, but and why, and what is it that's plaguing us? But why don't we build on some of the beautiful aspects that already exist in the neighborhood? And then how do we expose community to seeing their own neighborhood in terms of the beauty and the things that can be built on? So I would start with those two things. And then what Angela said is absolutely true. Everything pops up. There's a lot of different people who've taken the time to write on it. I just thought, I know Angela would agree that MPC piece is really relevant. Now, this city very much gets you into a lot of things that we're trying to do right now in the city. So I would suggest that.
Great. Those are all amazing suggestions, and we will link them in the sidebar too, so that people can find them after the conversation. But we've just got a couple minutes left. If there's anyone else who has a question, feel free to unmute, or Chris, if there's anything that's come up that you want to follow up on.
Well, I will ask one that I always ask, and really getting right to something that you talked about, Felicia, sort of sometimes when we're talking from a development perspective, it's so easy to put on our like glass half empty glasses and look at what in some cases are kind of over-examined phenomena. In the two communities that you both are, in the communities you both are working in, and maybe in the communities that you know best here on the South Side, what are some phenomena that you feel are kind of under-examined? One of the reasons that students come to Chicago Studies events is to look for things that they could be studying about the city, because they want their work to be meaningful too. And so are there things that if you had a couple of really eager, accomplished undergraduate researchers who were ready to dive in and write a 200-page long BA thesis, you'd love them to be writing about? This is your chance.
I think I'd answer with the resiliency, like Felicia was mentioning, resiliency that we see that pops up in families. What is it? What is that magic nugget? Like, why is it that, families that might not have a lot of something are able to sustain themselves? I think about in my neighborhood, a guy that's really making a nice living is the corn man that's on the corner with his little cart. His place is always packed. He is feeding his family, right? Now, some may look at that and look at it one way, but I'm thinking, how resourceful is this man that he is going to take what he knows and makes a living? And how can we replicate that? Because small businesses are really the largest quotient of business in the United States, right? But there are preclusions from certain groups of getting into small business. So how can we support more people into getting into small business, particularly those who have been affected by being justice involved and things like that, where they're not going to go out and be able to just get a job because they have to check a box. So creating an economy and creating a wealth building system would be great. How does one build resiliency would be a great topic.
I saw emotions from Felicia that looked like she, there you go.
You know what? I'm actually pretty kind of okay savvy in technology, but today I just kaput. I don't know what's happening. I have not taken my noontime, Hennessy's. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's happening. So I think, this is a slightly shameless plug, but not really. So Maddie Butler, for those of you that don't know, Maddie Butler is a young woman, 76 years young, who was a part of a movement around affordable housing advocacy some 30, 40 years ago. And she started this organization called We Can in Woodlawn. And one of the things that I learned from Maddie, and one of the things she was definitely a firecracker, she still is. And one of the things she talks about is the history of Woodlawn. And you really got to read that report. This is a shameless plug, at the University of Chicago that she pushed them to do on her terms. And it was an report that essentially said, I want you, universities, since you got all these whippersnapper young people, to go get the young people, match them with neighborhood residents, and let's do an inventory. Let's do a couple of things. The first thing was go back and look at the history of each building. Every property, I want you to tell me how many times it's changed hands, what's been the transaction, how much did it sell for, all of that. Then I want to go, and I want you to go, because you got to get the young legs, and we got some seniors here, and we're going to go out together and we're going to assess what's happening right now with those same either parcels or buildings. And then put it all together and help me come up with the recommendations that I know I'm going to find to say, here's what we need to make Woodlawn, but also other neighborhoods like it really grow in a real way. And I want that data to be accessible only by the residents that live in the neighborhood. Now, do they know what the hell to do with it? Maybe, maybe not, but we're going to teach them. And more importantly, we want them to have access to it, and it should exist. Now, what that was, so we did that. We worked with her she just left, Kathy Gerlach, who's with CIC. She also supported that effort. So we worked with her to do that, and we came up with a really good document. I'm going to task you guys from the university. It came out of OCE, and I can't think. It came out of OCE. Kelly Chavez, I think, will know, but you can connect. So send that out to the team. Everybody should read that document. We're doing one. We've done one for Washington Park, and they're getting ready to do one for South Shore. Same premise, same design. using the expertise of the university, but really on the terms of the community. Now, where the lesson that's learned from that is, as we talk about gentrification, there's what I call under the radar, under the MLS movement. Don't tell my secret. This is a neighborhood secret. So if I hear you say somebody else, then I'm gonna hunt you down. But I think what happens is people from outside of the community, outside of this country, what I will tell you is in 2014, we were going to buy, I think it was 18 unit building. I think they wanted to sell it for $12,000. I will tell you in 2016, that building sold for $185,000 a unit. That's different than 12. And I'm not making that number up. That is a factual number. I tell the story everywhere I go. The point of that is investors from out of the country look at the data and decide that this is where they're going to go. We talked to a Chinese investor who said, we saturated the market on the East Coast, we saturated the market on the West Coast. The Midwest is a prime market. And as we talk about gentrification, how do we equip residents to be able to plant their feet and then begin their own type of real estate movement that's below the MLS, that's below the radar? You know, Miss Knox lives next door to you, and you know that her special grandson is there. She may just need to be in a senior building. We got all the supports. Let's help mitigate the barriers. Let's even help their grandson, but then let's identify Miss Sally's son who wants to buy with his wife and come back to the neighborhood. Match the two, get an NHS in and a CIC in to help to capture it and or do the rehab, connect to a contract. And then you've created a way for people to stay in the neighborhood and grow. And then they can build on the equity that's gonna come. Keep in mind, Woodlawn is going to get the Obama Center. So speculators have already started, and we've seen this even before Obama even decided to come. So I think what I would say is a lesson learned that people don't pay attention to, and it goes back to community, but it gets into real numbers, dollars and cents. That's the value of your neighbors and your block clubs. Because I know something you'll never know about this block, and I have that relationship. So I can tell Miss Sally, don't sell. I got somebody that can buy from you. You hold out, let me help you mitigate whatever's going on, because I know some people that's got some services and some resources, and we're gonna fix you, and we're gonna bring in this new buyer. And if she's not ready, you got NHS in the resource center that's gonna help you build your credit till you get ready. And that price of that house won't be exacerbated to a way you can't get it. It'll be at a place where that new buyer can buy it, but they can also realize the equity, but that other family that own original owners can be whole. There's a way to do that, and you have to do it below the market, below the MLS. That's what I would like to see young people working on. If we could get some way to kind of operationalize and track and just have some people that are just focused on tracking that kind of activity, because it's happening. And it's anecdotal, and it's not at a robust way, because none of us have the time, and communities are just trying to put it together themselves. And some people don't even realize that's what they're doing. They just do it because you just do it. That's the thing that I think that we don't maximize in a real way.
This has been so wonderful, and we're grateful for your time today and for everything you've been sharing. One final question, and I understand if people have to hop off, we're about at an hour, but how can we support your work in research or in other ways that you're doing? We know about the Salud Center. How can you Chicago students be involved?
Yeah, I think data is important. I think we're beginning to collect data and learning how to collect data that can be useful when we're telling our story, useful when we're speaking with philanthropic partners and those types of things, connecting the history to data, to how we need that same data to continue to move us up our trajectory. So I think reaching out and saying, hey, these are the skills that I have, and let's figure out how we can use them.
I would say data too. I would say data in a different way. And I would just say, setting up the operations and the systems, but being intentional about, and with all that we do, I think there's a lack of intentionality around making it absorbable or consumable for the audience. I'm not going to know, I don't know how, anyway in hell, how to code anything. But if there's a way for me to set up a database and then I train people to know how to maintain it, because the goal is to move people to do it themselves. That's the key. The final thing I'll say is I did some type of presentation for the Obamas, you know, whoever they are, the young people that they found around the world to come and do great things. And talking to a group from Nigeria, one of the things they talk about with the NGOs was there is a disconnect. They want to come in and do great things, but don't give me a handout, give me a hand up so that I can do myself. That has to be the basic premise and the goal foundationally in whatever that's in any altruism or benevolence. How do I give you the tools to do it yourself? So I would say that we can get the data and we get the young people to do it, but I'd like them to be intentional about being able to transfer, operationalizing it. How do you maintain it? What is it I need to do? What are the next steps? What would it be? That's very important. That's that next step that we never do. But that's disrupting what we usually do.
I think it's such a good note to end on, and a good plug for transparency in research and what we call like open access with data, like having the actual outputs be visible, accessible. So often a lot of academic research is so proprietary about data sets, but I think there's an exciting push to open that up for researchers. So this is great. Angela, Felicia, thank you both so much. Yeah, applause all around. And yeah, thank you all for joining us. If you have follow-up questions, send them to us. You can email Chicago Studies. But yeah, thanks for joining us today.
The recording of this conversation will be made available on our website, and I will send it out to everyone who registered for the conversation. We'll also put some of the resources that were mentioned during the course of the conversation into the sidebar of that page so that they're available to folks. Our next Chicago Studies event is next week. We're having another data and dialogue. That session will be midday on Wednesday, and it's a conversation with Sarah Chapman, who's the director of the Media Burn Archive, which is a social justice documentary archive that is here in the city and that collects decades and decades of awesome documentary footage and alternative media, disruptive media about the city. Thank you, everybody.